When Daniel and his wife, Emily, moved into their dream home in the quiet suburb of Crestwood Hills, it felt like the perfect escape from city chaos. The streets were lined with trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and smiling neighbors who waved as they jogged by in the mornings. It was peaceful, clean, and almost too perfect, an illusion of harmony that came with a price tag and a set of rules enforced by one of the most notorious homeowners associations in the state. Daniel had done his research before buying the house, but no amount of online reading could prepare him for what Crestwood Hills HOA truly was, a miniature government of self-important retirees and rule-obsessed busybodies who viewed property ownership as an art form of control. At the center of it all was the HOA president, Marjorie Kent, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp bob haircut, designer glasses, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Her word in Crestwood Hills was law. Daniel was a mechanical engineer, and after years of working on renewable energy projects, he decided to bring that passion home. The roof of his new house was perfect for solar panels, south-facing, unobstructed by trees, and catching sunlight all day long. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about efficiency, independence, and doing something good for the planet. He crunched the numbers and realized that within 5 years, the system would pay for itself and start generating pure profit. When the panels arrived, he felt a spark of pride. He oversaw the installation himself, working side by side with the contractors. By the end of the day, his home gleamed with sleek black solar panels, reflecting the afternoon sun like a badge of progress. But progress, in Crestwood Hills, was a dirty word. 2 days later, Daniel found a bright orange notice taped to his front door. Non-compliance with HOA guidelines. It read in bold red letters. Beneath it, in cold, bureaucratic language, the letter stated that his solar panels were visually disruptive and non-compliant with the community's uniform aesthetic. He was ordered to remove them within 10 days, or face daily fines. At first, Daniel laughed it off. Surely it was a misunderstanding. The HOA couldn't just ban solar energy, right? After all, the state had passed laws protecting homeowners' right to install renewable energy systems. But as he read deeper into the HOA's bylaws, he realized Marjorie and her board had found loopholes. Clauses about roof modifications, non-reflective surfaces, and visual harmony. They had written the rules carefully, ensuring that anything they disliked could be deemed a violation. He sent a polite email to the HOA board explaining that the panels were legal, safe, and fully permitted by the city. The reply came swiftly. It was from Marjorie herself. Her tone was dripping with condescension, masking hostility beneath fake professionalism. She thanked him for his enthusiasm, but explained that his panels threatened to lower property values and would not be tolerated. Daniel couldn't believe it. Property values? In a neighborhood where lawns were measured by the inch and driveways had to be pressure washed weekly? It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control. Within a week, the situation escalated. Daniel began receiving warning letters, then fines. $100 per day, growing exponentially. His neighbors started avoiding him. Some whispered that Marjorie had told them solar panels could interfere with home Wi-Fi signals or cause fires. Others complained that the reflection from his roof hurt their eyes. It was absurd, but the HOA had a grip on the community, and most residents were too afraid to speak against it. One morning, Daniel watched as a board member snapped photos of his roof from the sidewalk, jotting down notes on a clipboard. The HOA had officially declared war. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man to surrender easily. He started documenting everything. Emails, notices, threats, and fines. He dug through state laws, zoning codes, and environmental protection acts. The deeper he looked, the more he realized how many homeowners had faced similar battles, and how often the HOA lost when challenged legally. He reached out to a local renewable energy advocacy group, which confirmed that the HOA's actions were illegal under the state's Solar Rights Act. The law explicitly protected homeowners from exactly this kind of discrimination. That was the moment Daniel decided that if the HOA wanted a fight, they'd get one. As he prepared to file his complaint, something unexpected happened. His electricity bill came in, and it was almost zero. The solar panels were performing even better than expected. Despite the HOA's threats, the system was working perfectly. That realization filled him with both satisfaction and anger. Here he was producing clean energy, saving money, and helping the environment, and his own neighborhood wanted to punish him for it. Over the next few weeks, the feud turned public. Marjorie called an emergency HOA meeting. Daniel wasn't invited, but he could hear the muffled voices from his porch. Neighbors argued, some supporting him, others siding with the board. One thing was clear: the community was divided. Then came the letter that changed everything. Effective immediately, it read, "The HOA will be pursuing legal action to compel the removal of your solar panels and recover unpaid fines." Daniel stared at the paper in disbelief. They were suing him. He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. He spent nights gathering documentation, consulting with lawyers, and preparing evidence. He wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to expose the HOA's corruption for the entire community to see. And deep down, a part of him already knew how this would end. He wasn't just fighting for his own right to use solar power. He was about to change Crestwood Hills forever as the court date loomed. The HOA doubled down.
Fines kairakitid.
Anonymous letters appeared in his mailbox. Someone even left a printed copy of the HOA rules on his windshield, with certain sections highlighted in red. Marjorie's campaign of intimidation was relentless. But Daniel had something the HOA didn't: facts, law, and time. He watched the sun dip below the horizon that evening, its last rays glinting off his panels. Those same panels that would soon become the centerpiece of a legal battle that no one in Crestwood Hills would ever forget. Because if Marjorie thought she could bully him into submission, she was about to learn just how powerful one homeowner could be when he decided to fight back. When the lawsuit papers arrived, neatly folded and served by a stiff man in a gray suit, Daniel didn't flinch. He had expected it. He had seen the signs: the silent cars driving by too slowly, the gossiping neighbors who stopped talking when he approached, the smug look on Marjorie's face whenever she passed his house during her daily inspection walks. The HOA had made its move, and now it was his turn. The legal complaint claimed that Daniel's solar panels violated community aesthetic harmony and structural uniformity guidelines. The HOA demanded immediate removal of the panels and payment of all accrued fines, which by now totaled over $10,000. They also sought compensation for distress caused to neighboring residents. It was laughable, but Daniel knew that, laughable or not, it was serious. The HOA had money, connections, and an attorney who specialized in enforcing association bylaws. Daniel's own lawyer, a calm and sharp environmental attorney named Rachel, studied the paperwork with narrowed eyes. She had seen this kind of power abuse before. The HOA was overstepping state law, and she knew it. The Solar Rights Act explicitly protected homeowners from HOA interference, but HOAs often gambled on intimidation, assuming most people would fold before a real fight. Not Daniel. He began to feel the full weight of the community's tension as the case made its way through pretrial filings. His mailbox filled with letters, both supportive and hateful. Some neighbors thanked him quietly, whispering that they'd wanted solar panels too but were too scared to apply. Others accused him of ruining the neighborhood's image and disrespecting the community's order. Marjorie, ever the queen of control, made sure her side's voice was loudest. She posted updates on the HOA's bulletin board, carefully worded statements about a resident in violation who refused to comply with reasonable community standards. She didn't name Daniel outright, but everyone knew. One morning, Daniel woke to find a large sign staked into his yard. Non-compliant property. It read in bold, all-caps letters. Beneath it, in smaller font, "This home is in violation of HOA guidelines." That was the last straw. Daniel documented it all: the sign, the notices, the online posts, even a recording of Marjorie shouting outside his property. Rachel was building a mountain of evidence. Every petty action, every abuse of authority, every attempt to shame him publicly would now serve as proof of harassment. But Marjorie wasn't done. She began to weaponize the community's infrastructure. Trash pickups were suddenly rescheduled for his side of the street. The landscapers who maintained public green areas somehow skipped his curb. The HOA newsletter even featured a long editorial about the dangers of unregulated solar energy. It was pure propaganda, but effective. By the time the court date arrived, the neighborhood was split cleanly down the middle. On one side were the loyalists, those who feared change, who worshipped the rules and Marjorie's authority. On the other side were the quiet rebels, homeowners tired of being told what kind of mailbox they could have or how high their grass should grow. For them, Daniel had become a symbol of resistance. The courtroom was small but packed. Marjorie sat at the front, flanked by the HOA's lawyer and 2 other board members. She wore a smug smile, clearly expecting a quick victory. Daniel sat beside Rachel, calm but alert, his hands clasped tightly together. The HOA's lawyer went first, painting Daniel as a reckless homeowner who defied community cohesion and endangered property values. They presented photos, emails, and excerpts from the bylaws, all meticulously chosen to make Daniel look like a stubborn troublemaker. Then it was Rachel's turn. She rose slowly, her voice measured and deliberate. She laid out the facts: the state's Solar Rights Act, the environmental laws protecting renewable energy systems, and the countless precedents where HOAs had been forced to back down. She held up Daniel's utility records, showing his energy production and savings. She displayed the HOA's own letters, filled with threats and insults. But her most powerful moment came when she introduced the State Environmental Commission's official letter, confirming that Daniel's solar panels were fully permitted, legally compliant, and beneficial to the community's energy goals. Marjorie's confident smile faded. By the time Rachel finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed irritated by the HOA's pettiness. He asked pointed questions. Why had the HOA fined Daniel daily when state law protected his right to install panels? Why had they tried to shame him publicly? And why, in an era where renewable energy was encouraged, did this association think it had the right to ban solar power? The HOA's lawyer stammered. Marjorie sat rigid, her hands gripping her purse tightly. When the judge adjourned for deliberation, Daniel finally exhaled. The outcome wasn't official yet, but he could see the writing on the wall. The HOA had overreached. 2 weeks later, the ruling arrived. The court found in Daniel's favor. The HOA was ordered to remove all fines, issue a formal apology, and pay Daniel's legal fees. Even more satisfying, the court declared the HOA's anti-solar clause invalid under state law, forcing them to amend their bylaws immediately. The news spread through Crestwood Hills like wildfire. Some residents celebrated, while others fumed. For the first time in years, Marjorie's control wavered. But just as Daniel thought it was over, another letter appeared in his mailbox. This one from the HOA treasurer. It said that, due to the court's ruling and unexpected legal costs, the HOA's operating budget was now in deficit. To recover, they would be raising community fees on every homeowner. In other words, the entire neighborhood would now be paying for the HOA's loss. Daniel couldn't help but smile. The irony was almost poetic. Still, the fight had changed him. He knew this wasn't just about solar panels anymore. It was about principle, about standing up against bullies disguised as community leaders. But Marjorie wasn't ready to accept defeat quietly. Rumors began circulating that she was planning to call an emergency election, one that could rewrite the board's power structure entirely. Daniel looked out over his street that evening, the sun sinking low and his panels glinting in golden light. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Because if Marjorie was preparing for one last desperate move, he would be ready for her. In the weeks following the court ruling, Crestwood Hills changed in subtle but undeniable ways. The HOA board was fractured, and its authority had weakened. Neighbors who once whispered behind their curtains now openly questioned the rules they had followed for years. The air carried an unspoken tension, the kind that lingered after a storm that had yet to fully pass. Daniel's house became a quiet landmark. People slowed their cars as they passed, admiring the sleek rows of solar panels that shimmered beneath the morning light. What had once been labeled a violation was now a symbol of victory. But beneath the calm surface, Daniel sensed that Marjorie wasn't finished. He saw it in her eyes when she passed him on the sidewalk, her expression icy and brittle. He heard it in the forced politeness of her voice when she addressed the neighborhood during HOA meetings. The lawsuit had humiliated her, stripped her of control, and she was desperate to reclaim it. 2 weeks later, the HOA announced an emergency board meeting. Flyers appeared on every door, printed in bold capital letters. Mandatory attendance. HOA financial emergency. Daniel knew exactly what this meant. Marjorie was going to use the community's anger over the raised fees to turn them against him. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a neatly decorated hall that had never seen such a large turnout. Residents filled every chair, some standing in the back, murmuring to one another. The mood was restless. On the stage stood Marjorie, perfectly poised, wearing a bright red blazer and the faint smile of someone preparing for a performance. She started with charm, thanking everyone for their commitment to community values and patience during financial challenges. Then she revealed the numbers, painting a grim picture of the HOA's finances. Legal fees had drained the reserve fund, maintenance projects were frozen, and annual dues would now need to be increased by nearly 20%. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd, and then, with a carefully measured tone, she shifted the blame. She never mentioned Daniel by name, but her words were sharp enough to cut through the room like glass. She spoke of one homeowner's unnecessary defiance, of legal expenses caused by selfishness, of individual actions that harmed the collective good. Every phrase landed like a dart, aimed directly at him. But Daniel didn't rise to the bait. He simply waited, because this time he wasn't alone. When Marjorie opened the floor for comments, the first person to speak wasn't Daniel. It was his neighbor, Grace, a quiet woman who had never attended a meeting before. She stood with a calm determination that silenced the room. She reminded everyone of how the HOA had overstepped the law, how Daniel's case had revealed deeper issues of control and abuse of power. Others began to follow. One by one, homeowners spoke out. They talked about the fines for small garden decorations, the threats for mismatched paint colors, the bullying tone in HOA letters. It wasn't just Daniel anymore. It was everyone. Marjorie tried to interrupt, her voice rising, but the room had shifted. The more she spoke, the more defensive she sounded. Her authority was unraveling in real time. When the meeting finally ended, the HOA board voted to hold a new election. This time, nominations would be open to any homeowner, not just the long-standing clique that had controlled the board for years. Daniel didn't plan to run. He had no interest in HOA politics. But when his neighbors nominated him, the room erupted in applause. He hesitated, then accepted. Not because he wanted power, but because he wanted to make sure no one like Marjorie ever used it again. The election was held 2 weeks later. The results weren't even close. Daniel won by a landslide. 2 other reform-minded homeowners joined him, replacing Marjorie's loyalists. For the first time in a decade, the board was new, and so was its attitude. Marjorie, stripped of her title, resigned the next morning. Her farewell email was short and venomous, accusing the community of ingratitude and reckless leadership. Within days, a moving truck appeared in her driveway. By the weekend, she was gone. Her house sold. Her reign over Crestwood Hills finished. Under Daniel's leadership, things began to change quickly. The HOA's bylaws were rewritten, removing dozens of outdated, controlling rules. Fines were reduced, approval processes simplified, and residents were encouraged to propose their own improvement ideas. Soon, solar panels began appearing on rooftops throughout the neighborhood, not as acts of defiance, but as signs of progress. And then, in a moment of pure irony, Daniel introduced his final motion as HOA president, a community-wide renewable energy initiative. The HOA itself, the same organization that had once banned solar power, would now use funds from its reserve to install shared solar panels on the clubhouse and community pool. The proposal passed unanimously. Months later, on a bright spring morning, the panels were installed. For the first time ever, the HOA's electricity bills dropped to nearly zero. The association, once the fiercest opponent of solar, was now saving hundreds of dollars every month because of it. When the first reduced utility statement arrived, Daniel stood in the clubhouse alone, looking at the sunlight glinting off the panels. He smiled quietly. The same HOA that had fined him, sued him, and tried to shame him was now benefiting directly from the very thing they had tried to destroy. It wasn't just victory. It was poetic justice. In the months that followed, Crestwood Hills transformed. The neighborhood that once lived in fear of its own rules became one of collaboration and pride. Families planted new gardens. Kids rode their bikes without constant complaints about noise violations. People smiled at each other again. Daniel eventually stepped down from the board, content to let others carry the torch. His job was done. The power had shifted from control to community, from fear to freedom, and every time he looked at his solar panels, the same panels that had started it all, he was reminded of one simple truth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's illumination. Because in the end, the HOA didn't just pay for their mistake, they paid for electricity too.